Hi everyone, I'm fortunate enough today to be sitting down with Chris Williamson. How are you, Chris?
Very well, thank you very much. Good to see you.
I'm sure people who have watched my channel know who Chris is. Chris, former Labour MP for Derby North. Now, there's so many questions I want to ask you after documenting what has happened over the last probably 2 years to you. The first one is the one that comes to mind is, where is the hole in your chest where you fell on your sword last year? And the second one is, after being stabbed in the back so many times, how do you not leak like a cartoon when you take a swig of water? I've documented what happened to you last year, and to say that I was dismayed and disgusted with the way that you were treated, as many other working class people were, would be an understatement. I first want to talk to you about Julian Assange, because, as you know, I've been a vocal supporter of his in documenting what has happened to him, his plight since he's been gagged and then dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy. You were the only MP who was vocally supporting him while this was happening. And I was at the Scotland Must Resist event in Edinburgh last week, and this has happened very often. I've been at more events than most people. And every single time your name comes up, there's a spontaneous round of applause. So on behalf of all those people who are standing up for free press, freedom of the press, free speech, civil liberties, all of these things, I personally want to thank you. And everybody who goes to these events knows how important it was for you to stand up and take the slings and arrows. And I'd really like to extend my gratitude for you for that.
Well, I'm grateful. Thank you very much indeed for that, and I really appreciate it. But to me, it didn't feel as if I was doing anything extraordinary. And indeed, I wasn't doing anything that was extraordinary. I was merely using a platform in Parliament to try and stand up for what I believe is right. And I mean, it's lovely to hear anecdotes like that, to know that what I tried to do in my own small way, is appreciated. But as well, it's an indication, I think, of what a parlous state our political system is in at the moment. I mean, to say that I was, the most vociferous supporter of Julian Assange, it's a wonderful accolade. But the bar is incredibly low, because hardly anybody else was saying or doing anything. I mean, to be fair, Jeremy Corbyn did speak out after Julian had been dragged from the Ecuadorian embassy, as did Diane Abbott as the Shadow Home Secretary. But I'd like to have seen, that followed through, and a lot more statements being made, both by Diane and by Jeremy. But also, the entirety of the Parliamentary Labour Party just seemed to be absent from the field of battle. And this is I believe, one of the most important challenges facing us if we genuinely believe in and support freedom of speech and a free press. Then, for God's sake, we've got to get behind and support Julian Assange. And, often people say to me, the way I've been treated, indeed you touched on it in your opening remarks, is terrible and so on. And it's bad. And it was difficult to cope with, I've got to say, when I was initially suspended and then resuspended and then told I wasn't able to stand for the party that I'd given my life to for 44 years. But the point I was just going to make is, though, that yes, it isn't pleasant, but compared to what Julian is going through, compared to what socialists in other countries are going through and have gone through in the past, where in order to stand up for what they believe in order for them to demonstrate their solidarity with people who are being badly treated, the consequences have been imprisonment, torture, and even death. I haven't faced anything like that. Yes, it's not pleasant. It's been very uncomfortable and incredibly upsetting. But I think we have to judge ourselves against real heroes like Julian Assange. He is an absolute hero, and we have, therefore, I believe, have to do everything within our power. And that's why I've tried to use my platform, as I've said, as a member of Parliament, to try and do in my own small way what I could, to try and draw attention to his plight and to try and get him released.
Why do you think that they haven't made such a big deal about this? Because you and I know this, Chris. It's certainly in my lifetime, this is the biggest threat to press freedom we have faced.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know you could make a really good argument that this is the biggest threat to freedom of the press and free speech ever in the history of ever. Why is it? I mean, I make a comment often, and because it bothers me, this does, that Jeremy Corbyn, you say he spoke out. He didn't really. He made a tweet. Diane Abbott made a speech, and Jeremy Corbyn made a tweet. He spoke out about Owen Jones getting into a fight outside of a pub for some reason and getting a bit of a scratch on his back. But he hasn't actually said any words in defence of Julian Assange and being thrown in prison. And can you shed any light as to why he hasn't said anything at all?
I don't know, to be honest with you. And, I would have liked Jeremy to have said and done more. I mean, it was good that he did what he did do, but I think it would have been helpful if he could have said more. I'm sure there were lots of pressures on Jeremy. His advisors may have said, this isn't the right battle to fight. I don't know. I wasn't party to those discussions. But I do think it's unfortunate, to say the least, that the leader of the opposition hasn't spoken out and done more on the issue. But let's celebrate the fact that at least he did do something, which is a damn sight more than anybody else has done, or any other leader of any other of the major parties in that sense. So, but I think let's kind of try and build on the positives. The fact that that's on the record. Diane Abbott's speech is on the record. Let's try and build on that.
And he's out of solitary confinement now, and his health is he obviously looks much better now from the pictures we've seen. So I do agree with it.
I mean, Jeremy was taken prisoner essentially by the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I think his advisors had probably taken a calculated decision that the way to get through. I think it was a false decision that they made, a wrong choice. And to put themselves or the Labour Party in the best position was to try to manage the Parliamentary Labour Party. Frankly, I think that was a totally false prospectus, because I think it would have been far better to have called out the malcontents in the Parliamentary Labour Party, as I did, and to get behind the whole democratisation agenda of the party, which I tried to do. And indeed, that's why they targeted me, because I believe that members of Parliament, Labour members of Parliament, should be accountable to their members, as it were. But I think I know it's a novel concept for us.
No, it's like that's a democracy,
yes, indeed. But I think a calculated, I can only assume anyway, a calculated decision was taken that the best way forward was to try and manage the parliamentary situation. But to be honest with you, I think Boris Johnson, not to burn any torch for him, obviously, gave a masterclass in how to be a strong leader. When he came into the position of leadership of the Tory party, he dealt with his malcontents by withdrawing the whip. That's what I believe Jeremy should have done. And he got rid of Winston Churchill's grandson, the father of the House, Ken Clarke, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, and so the list goes on. And a lot of people raised eyebrows at the time, but I thought that is absolutely the right way to not to support Boris Johnson's agenda in any way, shape or form. But in terms of driving through your prospectus, then I think that would have been a far better way. I mean, obviously, from Boris Johnson's point of view, he had a lot more supporters in the Tory party in the House of Commons compared to Jeremy. Most of the Parliamentary Labour Party, as we know,
to be honest, I think Nicola Sturgeon in the SNP has more MPs supporting her than the Labour Party.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and they were totally out of step with membership and out of step with the country as a whole, actually, in my opinion. And that's why I think we'd have been far better to have called them out. Yes, it would have caused some difficulty initially, but I think ultimately it would have sent a very clear message. And I believe that the grassroots membership were crying out for that.
Yeah.
And I think that would have generated another big surge in support for and membership of the Labour Party had Jeremy done that.
I totally agree with you. I do. To people in the Midlands and North who had voted for something and seen dilly-dallying for 2-3 years, to see Boris Johnson has seemingly at least grabbed the country by the scruff of the neck and tried to get them over the line, it won him the election.
Yeah. But I think we could have won the election. Two reasons really. Two strategic blunders that we made. One was agreeing to an election in the middle of winter. I mean, December's a time for singing Christmas carols, not for going around knocking on doors trying to encourage people to go out and vote. And then to have the second referendum being saddled with that as a policy position was disastrous. It's like signing our own death warrant to the electorate in that sense. So I think if we'd have taken on Boris Johnson saying we want to get Brexit done too, but we will deliver a people's Brexit, not a banker's Brexit. We'll deliver a Brexit which doesn't, venerate deregulation, that stops the offshoring of jobs to low-wage economies and actually, start to make the economy work in the interest. The fifth biggest, let's remember, the fifth biggest economy starts working in the interests of working people in this country. I think we could have won the argument, but we were on a hiding to nothing. I keep saying we. I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but I've been a member of it. I was a member of it for 44 years.
I say we, Chris. I say we.
But we were on a hiding to nothing by going to the country and arguing to say, well, we know you made a decision, but we want you to vote on it again. And many prominent members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, senior members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, arguing that Labour is now a Remain party and that they will campaign for Remain. I mean, it just sent the most disastrous message out to the general public, and we saw the consequences of it. I mean, what is sickening is that we warned them. I mean, I remember being shouted down, howled down at Parliamentary Labour Party meetings for making that very point. But I think there are a number of agendas at play there. One of which was, yes, I expect some of them were, committed to the European Union philosophically, but I think the other issue at play was that this was a good opportunity to destroy the Corbyn project, and so it's proved to be.
Okay, I don't want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn. I'm here to talk about you, because what you went through last year, like I said, I was dismayed and disgusted by it. I want to cast your mind back to January last year. We had the beginnings of a US, let's face it, coup in Venezuela, where they were trying to install somebody that only 18% of Venezuelans had actually ever heard of.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you stood up on the side of truth, because what I had found out during that period, and something that you were on the BBC, I remember telling a member of your own party, putting them straight, that actually their elections are one of the best and most unriggable in the world. And President Jimmy Carter was actually the person who would, he was
election observer there.
Election observer, and he was a sort of a charity, and he said it was one of the best elections ever he had seen. So, I mean, and you got up and you were talking about how the UK had withdrawn, I think, £1.2 billion in Venezuelan gold, and it was Venezuelan gold, it was mined in Venezuela that we're holding from them. And you asked, I think it was Alan Duncan at the time, if the Venezuelan people had the right to self-determination around the world and whether he supports it. And he called you not even a pound shop commie. This is where I started feeling that the knives were out for you at this point. How did you feel getting called that by the members of the opposition and not getting any support from your own members of the party?
Well, yeah, I was going to say it's a bit of a badge of honour, really, to be referred to. I think he was quoting one of the Nicholas Soames had referred to, I think, John McDonnell as a pound shop Leninist, and he said, we've just heard this morning from somebody who's not even worth a penny, let alone a pound.
That's right, yeah.
But no, what was disappointing was, I have no problem with the Tories attacking me. I mean, obviously, if the Tories attacking you, they must be doing something right. What was disappointing was that the jeers were as loud, if not louder, when I was making some of those points. When I was quoting the UN Special Rapporteur, who had
Alfred Desires.
Alfred Desires, absolutely, yeah. And he'd said that for example, the sanctions that were being imposed by the states were, in his view, illegal under international law and potentially bordered on crimes against humanity. And I was trying to make some of these points and trying to set the whole thing in context. It's not to say that Venezuela is perfect. I mean, no country is. They've made mistakes. I think they would acknowledge that. But to have this one-eyed view about what's happening in Venezuela is totally unacceptable, in my opinion. And what was disappointing, really, as I say, was not so much the reaction of the Tories. I quite enjoy, winding up the Tories, I've got to say, but it was a reaction from, if you like, my own benchers. Who were just as voluble in their criticism of the position that I was taking.
That is really, so that's the thing that was most troubling for you. You touched that, in that you expect your opposition, they're over there to oppose you. You don't. expect your enemies to come from the people behind you, but it seems that that's the situation. I mean, the Venezuela situation, as I stated, they've made, as you say, mistakes. There's no doubt about that. But you mentioned no one-eyed view. To look at it through the only angle being, oh, socialism's bad and he's spent all the money and he's done everything wrong and there's corruption, that's wrong. Same as looking at it through the eye of, oh, well, it's just the sanctions from America that have caused this. You know, it's just the pressure that the IMF have been putting on them, etc., etc. You have to look at it all in a collective. You have to look at all of the bits of information to get a proper view of it. And what I view Venezuela as is sort of a country that's trying to do what Labour was trying to do. They were trying to socialise the grassroots and trying to get people to work.
They've done an incredible job, and indeed, when I was going around the country, and indeed I still do, and speaking at various meetings, and certainly as part of the Democracy Roadshow that I was doing to try and encourage democratisation of the Labour Party, I'd quote some of the achievements that the Venezuelan government have made, and if you think about it, when Chavez came to power, I think in 1998. It was in the parlous state. Its GDP was lower, I think it was, than it was in 1998 than it was, I think, in 1964. The country was absolutely, well, not just stagnating, it was going backwards. There was
illiteracy was off
grinding poverty.
Childbirth was
absolutely, but they made huge strides. I mean, they eliminated literacy in a few short years. I think by 2005 it been basically eradicated in Venezuela. He set his stall out on education, on healthcare, huge improvements, massive reductions in poverty, huge improvements in the quality of housing. And one of the things that they did after the unsuccessful coup against Chavez in 2002 was to embark upon a process of political education, both in the military, and started recruiting people from the barrios. And they established sort of network of citizen militias, and this was one of the things I was saying, we could learn a lesson or two, because despite all of the pressure that's been piled upon them by the United States and the elites in Venezuela, and the extreme violence that's been meted out at the behest of the far right and the elites in Venezuela, aided and abetted by the United States as a line in the federal budget specifically for funding these right-wing groups in Venezuela. Despite all that, the government still enjoys popular support amongst ordinary working class people in Venezuela, and I think part of the reason for that is through these militias and so on, and they've kind of politicised the wider general public in that sense. And I was saying we could learn a lesson or two from that. I wasn't suggesting that we had armed militias in Britain, but I think in terms of building a mass movement and politicising the wider general public, it's absolutely crucial. And one of the reasons why I believe that was important was that were we to have succeeded in electing a Corbyn-led Labour government committed to a modest, let's be honest, a modest socialist programme, that there would be enormous pressure on them. And we know when not long after Jeremy was elected as leader, a serving general gave quotes to the Times newspaper talking about them not tolerating a Corbyn-led Labour government cutting defence spending or scrapping Trident or withdrawing from NATO, and that he said he would use fair means or foul to prevent that. Now that's treason.
Yeah.
And so it was clear that there would be enormous pressure. Who knows? Maybe even the attempt at a military coup. And on that basis, I believed, and still do, if we are ever to get a socialist government in this country, that we'll need a mobilised and motivated working class to come out onto the streets to defend that Labour government. Not to indulge in violence, but just to kind of be there to demonstrate there is mass popular support for the sort of programme that, a Corbyn-led, or indeed whoever it becomes in the future, a socialist, modest socialist programme in Britain will need that popular support in order to survive.
I think that's the only way forward. That mass movement of people is the only way we're going to get any change. We started. That's just Venezuela that happened. We covered there in January. At the same time, we had the Integrity Initiative story breaking. This is something that I covered. This is something that looks very much like an Operation Mockingbird-like.
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah.
operation where they have got academic, not just reporters, but academics that they rely on to punch out their proper propaganda. And again, you were the only MP coming out vocally against talking about that. Nobody else was. Then we've got the OPCW reports in Duma, which were extremely, shall we say, dubious, those reports, from the angles that they were coming from. You talked about those. Why do you think you were the only one who was talking about this? And I'm not just talking in Labour, I'm talking there's 650 politicians down there. You were the only one, Chris, talking about those things. Is it because the other 649 were just misinformed, or they didn't? What is it? Because these are things that, as a politician representing the people and serving the people, it's their duty to be talking about, isn't it?
Well, I felt it was, and it seemed to me to be just plain common sense that you would try and shine a light on some of these malpractices that were going on with, for example, the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative that you mentioned there. And to be fair, on the issue about Duma and the alleged chemical weapons attack used as a pretext for airstrikes in Syria, thank God it didn't escalate still further. There was a real fear that it could have done at the time. But Jeremy was asking these questions, and I was very strongly supporting Jeremy in the House, and I remember him getting a lot of criticism. That's a
fair point, actually. So you're the only one. That's a fair
sadly,
point.
Sadly, from both sides as well, because it was almost seen as, I mentioned treason earlier, but it was almost seen as a sort of a treasonous proposition that Jeremy was asking questions about. Do we have evidence for this? And have we spoken to the Russian government about this? And that was seen as anathema. This is appalling. Real hysteria was breaking out on the benches there, and we saw, interestingly, some of the most strident critics of Jeremy at the time on this issue subsequently left the party. They're part of this so-called Change UK now. I think they ended up, most of them joining the Liberal Democrats, and they've all now lost their seats.
They've all changed.
Yes, indeed.
That's all they did.
Absolutely,
Change
is a common currency, I guess. But yeah, look, Jeremy, yes, one of the few. I certainly, taking Jeremy's point on that and trying to pursue it. Look, people like Robert Fisk, a well-respected, investigative journalist in the sort of John Pilger tradition. He'd been to Doom, he'd spoken to people on the ground. I remember doing an interview with Cathy Newman on Channel 4 News, and the degree of incredulity in her voice that I could be challenging this. And when you think about it, and I made this point to Cathy Newman at the time, that the government, Theresa May, were basing the decision to launch the airstrike on hearsay, on social media posts. This is absurd. And,
open source material, she said.
Indeed, and when I pointed that out and said, Robert Fisk, by contrast, was saying something different. She was sort of seeking to question his integrity, although she subsequently did post a tweet apologising for that. The tone of the questions, it was as if I was sort of trying to excuse and whitewash this appalling chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians and children and so on. And she was sort of saying, well, how do you account for the fact, the children with streaming eyes and all the symptoms that were on display? And I did point out to her, well, what people on the ground, doctors on the ground were saying, what Robert Fisk was saying, this is a symptom known as hypoxia, where there's a shortage of oxygen, and it can be brought about as a result of military bombardment. No doubt there have been military bombardments there, and lots of dust clouds created, and reduces the amount of oxygen, as it were, in the atmosphere, and that then can bring on those symptoms. But no, that was just not accepted, and we were demonised and pilloried for merely asking those questions. I wasn't saying anything happened one way or the other. I said, look, I don't know. Maybe barrel bombs and chemical weapons had been used. We do not know. That's the point I'm making, Cathy, and said to her at the time. But no, I was sort of persona non grata for even having the temerity to ask questions like that. What it turns out is that we were right. And what was because at that point in time, the OPCW hadn't reported And I was then sort of placing a lot of faith in the OPCW because they should be an unimpeachable source. But when it subsequently came out, their report subsequently came out, key aspects of the evidence were missing from it. And that's now subsequently come to light. It's a really, really retrograde step, in my opinion, where you should be able to absolutely rely on bodies like the OPCW. And I think they've done themselves a terrible disservice by caving into whatever pressure was placed upon them to not provide the full story. And that's what we're fighting against at the moment. We are really fighting against fake news, and it's so important, therefore, that we have alternative sources of information for the people like yourself who are doing such an excellent job, I think, and trying to give another perspective for the wider general public to say, well, okay, it may not be quite as it appears on the BBC or Channel 4 or ITV News or Sky. There might be another perspective. I mean, RT do a great job on that. But I think all platforms, I'm sure RT has got its own agenda. The BBC's got an agenda. You've got an agenda. We've all got an agenda.
Of course, you're not going to get the truth about Russia from RT.
No, indeed.
Although
I've seen criticism of the Russian government on there and so on. But it's very, very sad that we're in this predicament at the moment where we can't rely on the information which has been pumped out by the state broadcasting corporation, the BBC, in this country. We do need to look at that. And of course, one of the things that Jeremy talked about when he spoke at the Edinburgh Festival, I think in 2018.
Yeah, I watched that.
Yeah, he was talking about the democratisation of the media, hugely important, and certainly the democratisation of the BBC and democratically electing the board of governors of the BBC and so on. I think would have been hugely beneficial and would have, I think, made a big impact in improving the quality of the news output. But the other thing, of course, he was talking about there was, creating journalistic sort of cooperatives, collectives, that we could have, genuinely impartial local news. Look, the local newspapers many of them have gone out of business. The circulation's going down the plug hole. But the main thing, look, for the media, the main driving force for the media has always been circulation and selling advertising. And they're not really necessarily that interested in the truth, really. And I think it would have been an amazing achievement to have delivered that transformation of the media in the way in which Jeremy set out in that really important speech that he made at the Edinburgh Festival.
Yeah.
And these things that are there, that and we can return to them. And in the fullness of time, I hope that we get a Labour government or any government that is open to a more progressive approach in relation to the media. And I think we have to keep pushing for that to try and make sure it happens.
Okay, so the media, at this stage, the media have treated you pretty unfairly. They've treated you with I think contempt would be the right word. And then you, I think you were, was it Sheffield? Was it a Sheffield?
Sheffield Momentum.
Sheffield Momentum meeting. Now I just want to quickly clip in when I edit this. I'm going to put in the clip of what you said. This is what Chris said that got him originally suspended.
The party that's done more to stand up to racism is now being demonised as a racist, bigoted party. And I've got to say, I think our party's response has been partly responsible for that. Because in my opinion, I never have, I've got to say, we've backed off far too much. We've given too much ground. We've been too apologetic. Being an anti-racist party. So
you said there that you believe you've backed off too much, the Labour Party have, and given too much ground to what many people believe, including me, is an anti-Semitism smear to deflect from crimes committed by the right-wing Israeli Likud party on Palestinian Arabs. I think that would... Have I characterised what you said there?
Yeah, more or less. I think the main point I was trying to make at that meeting was that, and indeed at previous meetings, is that Labour were being characterised as institutionally anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and the statistics don't back that up.
Well, the statistics don't back that up, but my own personal experience and the experience of every Labour activist that I've ever known or spoken to doesn't bear that out either. The Labour Party has a fine tradition of standing up to racism, fighting racism in all its forms, including anti-Semitism. And, the irony is that it's people like Jeremy's parents, his mother, was, for example, involved in the Battle of Cable Street and confronting Oswald Mosley's fascists in the 1930s to stop them marching through the Jewish quarter. People like Tony Greenstein, a Jewish member of the Labour Party, an anti-Zionist Jewish member of the Labour Party who's been expelled. His father was a veteran of that Battle of Cable Street, and yet he was accused of this is a Jewish guy, a left-wing Jewish anti-Zionist guy who was accused of anti-Semitism and been expelled for bringing the party into disrepute. And so the point I was making really is that, look, the Labour Party has got a strong tradition of fighting racism. I personally have fought racism all my life. I was an active member of the Anti-Nazi League in the 1970s, the rise of the National Front. Anti-Semitism was one of their key areas of hate that they were spewing out at the time. I remember as a young bricklayer in the 1970s confronting casual racism on building sites and nearly getting a head kicked in on more than a few occasions for my troubles, as it were. But to be, demonised in this way, I just found it incredibly, hurtful and made me really angry. And so I just felt that it's important to stand up for the Labour Party's reputation and also to stand up for people who have been falsely accused. Yeah. So people like Jackie Walker, a black Jewish woman, anti-Zionist campaigner, anti-racist, and somebody who's been a victim of racism, parents expelled from the United States of America in the 50s for un-American activities, basically supporting the civil rights movement. The irony in Jackie's case is that they were a victim of the witch hunt, McCarthyite witch hunt, and their daughter's now been the victim of a McCarthy-style witch hunt in the Labour Party, and many other people as well. Ken Livingstone, Mark Wadsworth, a well-known black activist who fought racism all his life, was involved in the black section movements in the Labour Party in the 1980s, was very instrumental in helping to elect the first black MPs in 1987, who advised the Stephen Lawrence family, who introduced Nelson Mandela to the Lawrence family when Nelson Mandela visited the UK. When the documentary about the murder of Stephen Lawrence was broadcast on TV, it was a 3-part documentary. The first episode of that 3-part series almost devoted entirely to an interview with Mark Wadsworth and his efforts. And he's somebody who was demonised as some sort of bigot. He was expelled from the Labour Party for bringing the party into disrepute. This is absolutely outrageous. It really angered me. I gave support to Mark. I went and gave evidence for him on the day. This was the day when 40 or 50 privileged white parliamentarians marched down to Church House, where the hearing into Mark's case was being held. It was a kangaroo court. It didn't really matter what was said. The decision had already been made. But the only thing that was missing was the burning torches and the white robes. I mean, it was like a scene out of Mississippi Burning, the film Mississippi Burning. Disgraceful behaviour. And these white privileged parliamentarians going down to a hearing, a disciplinary hearing, to try and influence the outcome of a disciplinary hearing against a black activist. As I say, a black anti-racist activist. Hugely appalling. I mean, and so that was all I was trying to do, was to say, look, we've got a fine reputation. We shouldn't continually be, as it were, backing off and apologising when it's the Labour Party that's doing more than any other political party. And by backing off and by
you have a leader who is the most anti-racist politician in Parliament.
But because Jeremy has been advised, and he's gone along with that advice, to keep apologising, it's actually fed the narrative that somehow we've got something to apologise for. Yeah. And I don't believe we have.
I'll come on to that in a little bit, but I will say this. That meeting that you were originally suspended for, it wasn't what you said that scared them. It was the applause that you got for what you said. That's what.
But I think the whole thing was a ruse, though. The reason why I was attacked, that was a convenient excuse that was used. But the real reason why I was attacked was for promoting democracy in the Labour Party. And I know that's the case because it's been fed back directly to me that a group of these senior MPs who were involved in the whole demonisation of me and behind the successful attempt in the end to get me suspended, were sitting in the tea room in the House of Commons and discussing my case. And the conversation went at one point something along the lines, we want to get Chris Williamson expelled as payback for the Democracy Roadshow. And I know that they were. I know they were troubled by my call for democracy, because a WhatsApp chat group conversation had been leaked and shown to me, where one MP, female MP, said that she wanted to start a crowdfunding exercise to have Chris Williamson assassinated, and had a few messages, approval, as it were. Mm-hmm. And then somebody asked her if she was okay. Why was she saying that? And she said, well, what do you mean? Because I want to murder Chris Williamson in the most painful way possible. I mean, this was a sick joke, of course.
Yeah, of course.
However, it illustrates the degree of disturbance that I was causing. Subsequently, when she discovered that I'd found out about this, she asked if she could meet me. And I dismissed. I wasn't really that troubled by it, to be honest with you. But she was mortified that it had been leaked.
Not so much that she said it.
Well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Well, she said, to be fair, she said she was very apologetic. She said it was a crass thing to say. She wanted to buy me lunch. We had a conversation, and she told me, she said, you're giving the Parliamentary Labour Party a collective nervous breakdown by speaking in these constituencies.
By asking for democracy.
Well, yes, I said, well, look, I mean, why? Because I'm only being invited to speak at these meetings by the members in those MPs, because I don't go anywhere where I've not been invited. And the MPs can come to the meeting, let's have a conversation. And I'm not just talking about open selection, I'm talking about democratisation of the party across the piece, about how the party makes policy. But also, the reason why we want to democratise the party is so that we can then go on and democratise the economy. It's a means to an end. It's like Tony Benn said, in order to democratise society, we need to democratise our party first. That's what I mean. And most of the discussion when I went and spoke at these meetings wasn't about open selections or I never spoke about deselecting anybody. I always used to joke and say there are a number of people I'd love to see deselected, but that's nothing to do with me. That should be a matter for local members. It's nothing to do with Jeremy Corbyn. It's nothing to do with me or anybody else. It should be down exclusively to local members. But the whole point about democratisation and making members more accountable, as I say, it's not just an esoteric internal argument. It's, as I say, to get people in place who will then deliver a programme which actually brings about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in this country. And the way you do that is through democracy. The way you do that is to democratise our economy so that it starts to work for the many, not the few. That's what it was about. Yeah. Not about getting rid of anybody per se in that sense.
And if I remember right, they tried to originally get you suspended for anti-Semitism, but that was refused. So in the end, you were suspended for a pattern of behaviour, they called it, didn't they?
They did.
So the pattern of behaviour seems to be wanting democracy in the Labour Party.
Well, they didn't. Well, in some of the leaked emails which I've seen, it's very clear as well from the General Secretary that's what it was about, the third suspension that I was subjected to. But no, I mean, literally, there's nothing that they can specifically say, oh, that was anti-Semitic. Yeah. And so what they then started to try and do was to say, look, this guy's displaying a pattern of behaviour. So taken on its own, each case isn't sufficient to suspend me. However, taken together, it illustrates that there is this pattern, and he is in reality, and this appalling phrase, for somebody that's fought racism all their life and so on, and defended Jewish members of our party, of our movement, was a Jew baiter. What a despicable and disgraceful thing to say about anybody. And it demonstrated to me. I know politics is a dirty business, but I like to naively think it should be an honourable process, really, an honourable business about trying to create a better society, trying to create a better world. And sadly, some people they descend into the gutter. Well, it's beyond the gutter. They just swim in the gutter. I mean, I don't know how much lower you can get than the gutter, but they certainly have found it. And to do that, not just to me, it's to hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, look, Cyril Chilson, as a man I quote on a number of occasions, an Oxford Don, a very learned person, a beautiful, caring man, who's both parents survived Auschwitz. He was accused of anti-Semitism. He's been expelled from the Labour Party for bringing the Labour Party into disrepute on the basis that he was an anti-Semite. I mean, it's beyond sickening. I can't find words. There are words, literally. There are no words in the English vocabulary sufficient to describe how despicable that is and the depths to which these characters will stoop in order to deliver a political goal. And that political goal is twofold. It's one, to stop a modest socialist programme, And secondly, to stop a government coming to office that had sympathy with and support for the Palestinian people.
Well, it's definitely, it's curious there how the media did their part as well in framing it as an anti-Semitism row. That's what they framed it as. And as we just conversed, it was nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's like, as that ex-Israeli MP says, it's a trick to use to deflect. Yeah. So you were suspended, and then you were found by the NEC to have only broken one rule, which was criticising your own party, correct? But you were unsuspended, and then that was overturned the next day because one of the people on the NEC apparently had some dodgy medicine. Now, at this stage, I was screaming into my camera. How did you stay in control and keep talking in such a measured way? Because I would have lost it at that point, although I'm obviously not a politician. How did you stay in control? And did you think at that point that you had any hope of winning, or did you think, okay, the writing's on the wall here? Because I know a lot of people at that stage, myself included, I was going mad because I could see at this point you were done for. What was your
I'm an eternal optimist. People say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope springs eternal. I believed naively that I could be reinstated into the party right to the very bitter end, in fact, in November, when I was eventually prevented from standing as the official Labour candidate. It was incredibly upsetting. I was in a very sort of dark place, if I could say that. I was very hurt, I was very upset, as I was in February. I felt it was stabbed through the heart by people as well who I had a lot of respect for, was close to, who failed to speak out and support me. I never asked for anything from the Socialist Campaign Group for the first 4 months that I was suspended, even though I felt that they should have shown some solidarity with a comrade who had been clearly unfairly treated. And they all, I think, agreed that I had been unfairly treated. But then when I was resuspended, I saw, I tell a lie, actually before I was resuspended, there was a move by over 100 MPs and peers, Labour MPs and peers, to remove the whip from me for a year and to launch an investigation as to why and how I'd been reinstated. It was at that point, actually, that I sought a measure of solidarity from the Socialist Campaign Group, of which I'd been previously a member before I was suspended the first time around. And it just wasn't forthcoming. And I felt very let down as a consequence. And the thing that sustained me, you asked me how I kept going, was the incredible outpouring of solidarity from all the grassroots party members, and indeed people beyond the party. I was literally overwhelmed. I was inundated by messages of support and solidarity. And that, frankly, is what kept me going. When I was first suspended, the messages of the kind messages of support and solidarity were all difficult to read at times. I was very emotional. I was in tears on a few occasions, actually. It's reading these.
Like I said at the beginning, I've seen it. I've seen the support for you. Even when you're not there, your name gets mentioned, and there's a round of applause. People
could see the injustice, I think, and and it was incredible. I was offered come and stay for rest and recuperation. I was offered to holiday home in Cornwall, the Cotswolds, West Wales, the Lake District, Spain. Well, I never took any of them up because we're doing stuff going on in the house and commitments in the constituency and so on. There was a rally, an anti-austerity rally in West Wales. I think the weekend after I'd initially suspended it, they'd got impromptu banners with solidarity with Chris Williamson, and they were asking people to sign and pose for photographs with a A4 sheet saying, I support Chris Williamson, hashtag I support Chris Williamson because, and then people writing a message on it, and having a photograph taken. I just couldn't believe it, I think, how do people know about me in West Wales? It's unbelievable, And I remember I was speaking to one of the women who was involved in that rally, and I said, "That's incredibly moving. I'm so grateful, but why? You know?" And she said, "Well, we remember you came over to speak to us in our constituency, and unlike other MPs, well, one, we never normally get MPs, but when they do come, it's for some fundraising dinner and charging 20, 30, 40 pound a head, and the income's very, very low, and a lot of it excluded a lot of people. You came, it was free, and you wouldn't even accept any travelling expenses, and we really appreciated that, we valued that, and we wanted to sort of return, that sense of solidarity and a gesture of solidarity, and that's what really drove us. So you don't do these things for anything in return, but it's wonderful when people recognise this is someone who is a kindred spirit in that sense. What was so sad, though, was that the juxtaposition of that level of incredible solidarity. I've never seen anything like it. It was amazing compared to what was happening in Westminster. It was literally zero solidarity. There was a handful of people who spoke to me privately. It was literally a handful. Spoke to me privately. But as I've always said, look, solidarity is always important, but it only really counts when it's difficult, not just when it's easy. And it's not that difficult anyway. I mean, what's going to happen? People shout at you. Showing solidarity when you might put your life on the line, as we know, as we mentioned earlier on, when you might get imprisoned, when you might get tortured. I mean, showing solidarity to me would have meant that, you'd have got some bad burst publicity in some of the mainstream media, maybe the Jewish Chronicle or something. But you may have got some criticism from other parliamentarians. But so that was just incredibly disappointing. But the thing that kept me going was, as I've said, just unbelievable level of solidarity, which is still there and it's wonderful. And that's. But I don't mind saying. I mean, it really did have an effect on me. I couldn't eat for days. I lost. I'm not very heavy already, but I lost over half a stone in weight. I couldn't sleep. It was awful. It was an awful time.
That's the reason why I wanted to ask you that question, because I don't think all the media smear you and they don't give it a second's thought. They don't realise that there's an actual person on the end of all those smears. There's an actual person who is reading. There's a person who's got a family and friends who are going to read these horrible things about.
Well, it affects on the partly. I mean, she was. She's very stoic, but I've been occasions where it's really got to her.
I can imagine.
And she's been sobbing in tears on more than a few occasions. Some of the appalling things that have been said, which are just total lies.
Well, that's the thing as well. And the people showing solidarity with you, they're showing solidarity with you because it's the truth.
Yes.
And you're standing up for what's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the people who aren't are the people who are supposed to be representing those people. So you take your own party to court, and this is one you've dedicated your life to. I mean, I've got a little bit here of your history here, which is, you're amazing. You're incredible. You joined the Labour Party in 1976. I was 2 when that happened. So you obviously look a hell of a lot younger than you really are.
It's the vegan diet.
Yeah, you're a vegan. You're a former brickie, as we've said. You turned social worker, and then you became a human rights officer. You oversaw, when you were a Derby councillor, I wanted to point this out to people who've mentioned you being smeared as an anti-Semite. When you were a Derby councillor, you were instrumental in setting up Holocaust Memorial Day events.
One of the first in the country, actually, to do that. And it wasn't just instrumental in it, I drove it. I made sure it happened. Without me, that would not have happened.
So for 44 years, you've dedicated your life to this party, and you finally had to take them to court just to clear your name. You win the court case, and the media say you've lost. How do you think that they squared that circle? You won that court case, and every headline was that you lost.
I mean, on reflection, I think because what happened was I'd been suspended, as you know, was then reinstated, and then subjected to a second suspension. It was on that basis that we took the legal action, and I was asking for an expedited hearing, because I was saying, look, there's a real danger there could be an early general election. And the Labour Party bureaucracy were resisting that. And you had to have 3 preliminary hearings. Because the Labour Party were instructing their lawyers to argue in court that there was no evidence that there was going to be an early election, that Mr. Williamson is merely speculating about this. And each time the judge threw out the Labour Party's arguments, it went to a third hearing, and the judge threw them out again, but then said, I think it was getting a bit fed up of this, said, and the hearing will be held on such and such a date. He gave a date within the week of late September when it was held, at the week beginning, whatever it was, at the end of September. Within 36 hours of realising that they had to go ahead with this court case, I think they realised they had no chance of winning.
Mm-hmm.
The party bureaucracy then issued me with a third suspension, and even more preposterous allegations were made against me. We then asked our solicitor, my solicitor, if we could get that considered in the same case, you see. And the court ruled that yes, they would allow us to make representations on that. But when the judge eventually made his ruling, the courts are reluctant, I'm told, to get involved in arguments with private organisations and the way in which the Labour Party is. So we found in our favour on the substantive case, the original suspension and second suspension, but said that the judge went on to say that the fact that that's been ruled unlawful doesn't insulate me from fresh allegations. Given that these allegations were only put to me, I think, less than a week before the actual hearing took place, he didn't feel that it was right for the court to rule on that. So it had to run through a process in the Labour Party first. So it was on that basis that I think the court and the Labour Party were saying, oh, well, he's lost. We then obviously wanted costs. The judge, in cases like this, asked both parties to try to come to some sort of agreement on the final order of the judgment, which incorporates costs. Normally, both parties are reasonable and they come to an agreement. The Labour Party were just bureaucracy were completely unreasonable. And in the end, the judge decided that the issue a preliminary, and then they asked for comments and can we agree. They refused to agree on anything. We then put forward our proposition, my lawyers, saying that we believe that we should get 90% of our costs, etc. They then kicked up a stink about that, couldn't reach an agreement, so the judge said, well, we'll have to have another hearing then to determine the terms of the court order and the level of costs, etc. That then went to a hearing. The Labour Party incredibly were arguing that I should pay 60% of their costs. My lawyers said that, look, we feel that we can legitimately ask for exemplary costs because of the way in which the Labour Party has handled this whole process. They haven't cooperated. They've been incredibly arrogant and aloof. And we therefore feel that we've got a good chance of getting 90% of our costs. But they said, but be prepared. We think that it would be a good result if we can get 70% of the costs. We might end up with as low as 50%, but we don't think we'll get anything less than that. We then went to the court. The Labour Party made the argument that we should pay, or I should pay 6% of their costs. We made our case that we wanted 90% of the costs. The judge ruled that Labour Party should pay 100%, not 90%, 100% of our costs, right up to the 5th of September, I think it was, and then 30% of our costs for the period up to the actual date of the hearing, which was in the middle of about less than a week anyway, I think it was, up until the hearing. So what even the judge was acknowledging was, although he felt that he didn't feel the court should, as it were, rule on the third suspension at this time, not that it was correct or anything like that, but that he should rule on it at this stage because these were new allegations, so-called. He nevertheless still awarded us 30% of our costs, even for that period of time. So we basically won game, set and match, and yet still the media haven't corrected the record, and still Labour Party bureaucrats try to make an argument that somehow they won, when clearly they didn't. And a clear indication that they didn't win is the fact that we won all of our costs. If they'd won anything, then they would have or there would have been a massive reduction in the amount of costs that were awarded. The judge awarded us more than we were asking for, which gives you a clear indication who won that case.
I'm glad you cleared that up, because written here I've got, so you win the court case and then I think we're re-suspended. I think that was right. And I'm glad you cleared that up anyway.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to the anti-Semitism thing, because before we come on to what your next steps are. This is why I think the anti-Semitism smear stuck. And it's why I think that your attitude of we've given too much ground, we've backed off too much, was the right thing to take, because you're on the side of truth here. Because let's say this is the way I think Jeremy Corbyn, for instance, or any Labour politician should have addressed the question: are you an anti-Semite, or should you apologise for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? What do you think the difference would have been if Jeremy Corbyn had come out and said, no, I'm not going to apologise for that, and here's why: because this is a diversion tactic. What you're trying to do is and people who are smearing us as anti-Semitism, as anti-Semitic, and as an anti-Semitic party, it's a diversion tactic to take away the fact that Israel have committed crimes against Palestinian Arabs, and that's what we're against. And by the way, Palestinian Arabs are Semites. If you want to talk about racism and anti-Semitism, then let's talk about Israeli Likud Party's anti-Semitic treatment of the Palestinian Arab, shall we?
Ironically, most of the Israelis who come from Eastern, or many of them, come from Eastern Europe, are not Semites.
And of course, and likewise,
so I want to be pedantic about it,
And likewise, of course, saying it is anti-Semitic to criticise Israel is in itself anti-Semitic, because not all Jewish people support the right-wing antics of Israel against Arabs. If that was the defence that Jeremy Corbyn and members of the Labour Party made, what difference do you think will it have made?
Well, I think it would have been a huge difference. And in fact, I've been arguing that behind the scenes and made these points to Jeremy privately anyway. Prior to making those public, I was getting increasingly frustrated, and so I was articulating some of those frustrations more openly. I mean, a lot of these comments that I was making at that meeting in Sheffield, I'd been making behind the scenes for some time. And I remember speaking at a Socialist Campaign Group meeting where I was saying, look, this is getting to ridiculous proportions now. We have to draw a line in the sand and start standing up to this, because this is just getting out of control, and it will consume the whole party, and it will result in basically consuming Jeremy, taking out Jeremy. I was a sort of collateral damage, if you like. No, I think we should have said, Jeremy should have said right at the outset, stood up for his own reputation, which is unimpeachable, stood up for the Labour Party's reputation, which is, by and large, pretty much unimpeachable, as an anti-racist party, and called it out for what it was. This was a smear tactic. I think Jeremy should have defended Ken Livingstone. I think he should have defended all of the grassroots activists that were thrown under the bus. He should have stood up for Mark Wadsworth. He should not have allowed this process to get out of control. And I think, to be fair, Jeremy, I think, was making a principled or taking a principled stance on this, and I think in the sense that he felt, well, look, I'm the leader of the party, but these procedures, I'm not. He always got to make this point. I'm not a dictator, but I think that was a mistake. Tactically, I think that was a mistake, and it allowed it to kind of, sort of balloon out of control. And I think the line the sand should have been drawn before this, but I think where a clear line in the sand should have been drawn was when John Mann went for Ken Livingstone. When Ken made those comments about the Havara agreement, I think Ken himself would acknowledge that perhaps he could have expressed himself better. He wasn't necessarily expecting a question about Hitler. He was on, I think it was Vanessa Phelps. He was doing the media rounds, trying to defend Nashar, who'd been accused of anti-Semitism for sharing a meme that had been shared by, I think, Norman Finkelstein, actually, a Jewish academic who's very well known. And she'd shared that, and that was deemed anti-Semitic, and I think she'd said some other stuff anyway. Ken was, as an act of solidarity, trying to defend Naz and saying, look, he knows Naz, he's campaigned with her, she's no anti-Semite. And then he got this question about Hitler, and he articulated his answer perhaps in a clumsy way, and that was seized upon, but not immediately. Ken makes this point when he's speak about this. He said that when he did that interview, he said there was absolutely no reaction for several hours afterwards, nothing. If you think if there was such a furore about it, the response had been quite quick to it. But there was literally nothing on social media. Nothing he said. Certainly no media intrusion or questions being asked until he was ambushed by John Mann with a camera crew when he was accusing him in very aggressive and offensive tone, saying that he was a Nazi apologist. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful. I mean, look, Ken earned the sobriquet as a loony lefty, partly for his stance as leader of the GLC in the early 1980s on standing up to racism, standing up to bigotry, in all its forms. And, the absurdity of accusing somebody like Ken Livingstone, of all people, of being some sort of Nazi apologist was just it's absurd and incredibly offensive. And, Ken was very measured. I think you must have seen the footage of that. Man in his face, in Ken's face, his cheeks glowing red, his eyes bulging, John Mann's this is. He kept glancing over like this to make sure the cameras were still on him. Followed Ken all the way up the stairs. I think he was at 4 Millbank. Ken was going to do another interview. It was from there that then the whole thing exploded. And I think Jeremy was in a difficult place. He didn't have the numbers on the National Executive Committee. But for me, if it had been me as leader, I'd have said to the National Executive Committee, well, look, we know what Ken Livingstone's record is. We know he's somebody who is an anti-racist campaigner. All the reasons I've just outlined to you, he earned the sobriquet as a loony lefty, partly for his stance on racism when he was leader of the GLC. You may not support me. I haven't got the numbers on the National Executive Committee. But I'm going to go out and I'm going to publicly defend Ken Livingstone because he's a comrade. He's somebody who stood up to racists. He stood up against bigots all his political life. And I'm therefore going to defend him. And I've just got a mandate from the members which, around 60% support me. Now, I might not have the numbers in here, but I'm going to go out and defend him. You can say what you like, and then we'll fight it out at conference, and we'll see who wins, shall we? I think they'd have called the bluff, and they wouldn't have done it.
I do too. Jeremy Corbyn's stance on this is maddening for me. It's maddening for me because I can't understand why he's taken the course of action he's taken. He's a lifelong anti-racist. He's a lifelong defender of Palestinian Arabs during the crushing illegal occupation of their country by Israel. He's a lifelong supporter of it. He gets hit with a smear from people who don't like the fact that he's supporting that. And it's his opportunity then to put everything that he has campaigned for and against his whole career front and centre as leader of Her Majesty's opposition. You and I like football. It's a tap-in. And instead of what he's doing is he's confirming the narrative and then trying to make some point about anti-racism. I said in one of my live streams not long ago, it's the equivalent of having a tap-in, the goalkeeper's on the floor, you're not offside, and instead of tapping it in, he's decided to try and dribble around 7 people and do an overhead kick from outside the area. I don't understand why he's taken that course of action and why he's not just hit it the right way, which is to say, no, that's bullshit, and here's why. Every time he does what he's doing, he's confirming their narrative, and it's like he's doing their work for them.
Well, I think that's how it certainly panned out, and I tend to agree with you that it would have been, far better to have taken the answer that you and I believe he should have done. But I think his advisors, took a different view. I remember trying to get a meeting with the Jewish Voice for Labour, with the Socialist Campaign Group, and there was resistance to it. People were nervous that if we had the Jewish Voice for Labour in to speak to us, then have to invite the other side, if you like. I said, well, it's our meeting. Why have we got to, Anyway, in the end, we had to have a special meeting, which wasn't really an official meeting of the Socialist Campaign Group. And then only 2 people, and myself, 3 of us in total, turned up to meet. And look, the Jewish Voice for Labour are on our side, if you like. These are socialists in the Labour Party, strong supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. And we seem to be keeping our good friends, as it were, at arm's length and bending over backwards for people who are trying to destroy Jeremy and trying to destroy this socialist project. And that was tactically inept, I think, to take that position. But what happened? And obviously in the end, Jeremy's decision, but his advisors, I think, have a lot to answer for as well.
I quickly want to talk. So the thing, my view with Israelis, my feeling is, after seeing it for the last few years and after really investigating what is going on with our media, etc., with it, is criticism of Israelis generally looked down upon by the powers that be in this country, because criticism of Israel, they believe, at least I think, would weaken a strategic military foothold in the Middle East.
Well, there may be some elements of truth to that, but we know that the Israeli regime, the Netanyahu regime, all the Israeli regimes for that matter, the Israeli Labour Party leaves a lot to be desired, I think. But we know that they use anti-Semitism as a tactic to close down solidarity with the Palestinian people. And Regev, the Israeli ambassador, was sent here with a clear task of smashing the BDS campaign, the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign against Israel. And you think back, I'm a sort of old enough to remember, a veteran of the anti-apartheid movement and the sanctions campaign against South Africa. It was one that gained a lot of public support and helped, I think, to see the demise of that appalling, pernicious regime there. I spoke to South Africans, black South Africans, who tell me that the apartheid which the Palestinians have been subject to is far worse than anything they encountered in South Africa, with all the brutality that we know about in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela himself, I think it wasn't, who said that our freedom is incomplete until we have freedom for the Palestinian people. So, I think there's a sort of big job for us to do. We have to keep pushing this agenda, but the definite, very sort of powerful, forces at play here with the Israeli state doing whatever they can to undermine those pro-Palestinian activists. The whole issue around smashing the BDS campaign, the whole nonsense about the IHRA, adopting those examples, which have been rubbished by Kenneth Stern, one of the authors of the IHRA.
No, it was the globally approved definition. That was everybody in the world approved of that definition.
And then we found out there's only 8 countries.
There's 8 countries.
I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And many Jewish people in this country are just as opposed to the adoption of the IHRA. In fact, I was asked to go and speak at the meeting, or to rally outside the National Executive Committee meeting when they were debating whether to adopt the IHRA examples. And there were hundreds of people there, and many of them were Jewish, who were opposing the adoption. There were a few pro-Zionist activists there as well. There was only literally a handful, no more than a dozen, if that. And I was being screamed at by one of these characters over a megaphone when I was speaking to some media after I'd made a speech. And he was accusing me of being a Labour fascist, eating the scum of Corbyn's plate. It turns out this guy is connected to the EDL, I believe it is, in this country. So it's rather odd, a fascist calling somebody who's a socialist a fascist. But there we are. This is the absurdity of the situation that we're in. It's almost, as said this on a number of occasions, as if we're living within the pages of 1984. The absurd state of affairs. But no, that was a very foolish move, in my opinion. And Tony Greenstein, again, I remember speaking alongside Tony at a fringe meeting in Liverpool a few years ago, when he said, look, you don't need, he had the precise number of words that are in the IHRA examples, 500 or whatever it is, words to describe what anti-Semitism is. It's a relatively straightforward concept, actually. Anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews and so on. But he went on to say the only reason you need that lengthy explanation, examples, is if you want to incorporate criticism of Israel into the definition. And that's what's been going on. And highly regrettable that the Labour Party has fallen for that, or the National Executive Committee's fallen for that. Because the Labour Party, almost above all else, ought to be the party that champions freedom of speech.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with this. And you mentioned there, this does, in my opinion, this does the fight against anti-Semitism, the fight against racism, a disservice by them by them saying that this is racism and anti-Semitism when it clearly is not. This is clearly something that is designed to stop any and all criticism of Israel. This is clearly something that's designed to stop anybody being critical of, let's face it, a state that is a law unto itself on the world stage. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the media about the JCPOA and the Iran nuclear deal. Well, Israel won't even, they're not even party to any sort of inspectors. They're the only country on the planet, I think, who don't actually say how many nuclear weapons they've got. Netanyahu admitted the other month, I think it was, that yes, we do have them. They're a law unto themselves. They're in the Middle East, but they play in the European Football League because all the teams in the Middle East won't play against them. They've boycotted them. In the Eurovision, they're not part of the nuclear treaty. We have to stand up to this, don't we? We have to stop them stopping criticism of this, because otherwise we're playing into something that could really cause huge destruction down the line, because it's calling people racists for criticising racist behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to stand up to injustice wherever we see it. And as socialists, that's our duty, in my opinion. And to not do that, to run away from that, I think, is a betrayal of everything that we stand for.
Now, you say you're going to stand up, and I'm just closing up, I want to come on to this. What are you doing next? Because I'm assuming there's going to be lots of people that you're going to be suing over the coming year or two.
Well, I'd love to, actually. Listen, if I was a rich man, there is a number of people that would be served with writs already. And if I win the lottery, then that's one of the first things that I should be doing. I can assure you of that. Margaret Hodge, Charlie Faulkner, and a few others will be getting a writ. And in fact, that will give the game away that I've actually won the lottery, I think. Because that's one with a clear indication.
Yeah, if that happens, I'll be tapping you up for 20 quid.
No, absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, well, for me, I think it's not so much litigation. One of the things that I have done is to establish a left legal fighting fund. We need to build that up much more.
And this is not just, this is for people who have seen the sort of treatment that you're seeing, is it?
No, for sure. Yeah,
forced out.
Well, there's hundreds of people that's been forced out.
Obviously, it's not just you.
Well, thousands actually of people who've been unfairly treated, and of course, and it's not just the impact that it has politically on people. What we've seen is people. Their jobs, their careers have been put on the line. People have been sacked as teachers for this.
Yeah, I personally know somebody whose marriage broke up.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. They're destroying people's lives. And I spoke to one woman who was a teacher, lost her job, and she was a union official. The union refused to take on the case because they said it was too toxic, this whole issue of anti-Semitism. She hadn't said anything that was deemed severe enough to be suspended from the Labour Party. So you can tell it was a fairly, softball comment that she'd made in relation to Palestine. And it wasn't deemed serious enough to suspend her from the Labour Party. And bearing in mind that the bureaucracy is suspending people for trouble they had. But the people making the complaints also complained to her school, and the school sacked her. She couldn't get representation from the union, even though she was a union official. But she tried to defend herself, and she had a lawyer who wasn't regrettably well enough versed, I think, in some of the arguments. And it got to the employment tribunal. It looked pretty clear that she was on course to lose, and the school's legal team offered her a deal where if both parties walked away and just paid their own costs, we'll call it quits. So she ended up agreeing to that. But she was out of pocket by 20 grand.
So she's out of pocket by 20 grand.
20 grand.
She's lost her job,
lost her career, and has been
recourse.
unemployed for 18 months. I mean, this is what these characters that are behind these smears are actually.
These are the stories that the media should be concentrating on.
Totally.
It's
Yeah.
These stories.
Well, that's why when we won the case and we got costs, established this left legal fighting fund to try and help people in that situation and situations like that, and also people who are being pursued by the likes of Rachel Riley, for libel and so on spurious grounds. And of course, people like celebrities with lots of money and often taking on people who haven't got a lot of money, so it's an unequal contest. Obviously, the amount of money that we put into, or I put into that fund is inadequate to do a great deal. So I'm hoping that we can build that up. What I'd like to do is ultimately build a fighting fund of £1 million or something of that magnitude. That's a long way off. But that's the sort of fund I think that we need if we're going to be able to realistically fight back and take people behind some of these attacks on long-standing anti-racist socialists. If we're going to create a level playing field and make it clear to them, look, you can take these, they take us on, you can use these dirty tactics, but if you get in the ring with us, you'll end up with a bloody nose. Yeah. And as things currently stand, it's a very unequal contest, and many people are feeling that they have to sort of capitulate. But even when they do that, if they don't sort of end there, they then pursue them still further. Even if they do make an apology, they want more, they want damages, they want this and they want that. So that's something that we're trying to work on, and then also is talking to people up down the country about the prospect of establishing a new grassroots movement to try and fight back against the impact of the Tory government, which is certainly going to launch, I think, a series of attacks on working class communities, even more attacks on working class communities over the next few years.
Yeah, the grassroots movement is it's something that I will definitely be interested in covering, because it's the only way we're going to get any lasting change in this country. It's fairly obvious to me, having having watched your story over the last year and sat here with you for an hour or two. We're not going to find salvation in elections.
No, I mean ultimately, I think we might be able to rehabilitate the electoral system. I hope we can. But if that's all we're relying upon, then it ain't going to work. And I think we need to, and what I believe anyway now, is that we need to focus on trying to build an alternative grassroots movement, do a number of things. We need to learn a lesson from groups like the Panthers in the States, where the US state had withdrawn from delivering decent public services.
Yeah, they've broken the social contract, haven't they?
Completely. And so I think what the Panthers did, and there's other examples around the world, Podemos is another good example, where they got involved in providing an alternative infrastructure. We need to try and create an alternative infrastructure. So to give communities, if you like, the ability to stand up for themselves. So I think it's about building capacity in communities, like the Panthers did, where they were providing breakfast and shoes and clothes and legal advice to working class communities. We need to be replicating that. We need to raise political consciousness in communities as well, because look, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. Nobody should be living in poverty. No. Nobody should be struggling. Nobody should be sleeping on the street or in low-paid, insecure employment or have inadequate housing where they have got it. I think that the media hasn't really given people, the education system either hasn't given people the information about how society works, how the economy works. How is it in this incredibly wealthy nation that there are so many people in poverty, 14 million people in poverty in the country with the 5th biggest economy. So I think it's about building capacity, raising that political consciousness, using alternative media and growing alternative media. I've been speaking to people about the potential of community radio, for example, and trying to develop that in different communities. Building other alternative media. There's talk about trying to launch a new left tabloid newspaper as well. But giving communities that ability to be able to sort of speak to each other and get messages out there which are not being covered by the mainstream media, either local mainstream media or indeed the national mainstream media. And then also how we can use culture. I'll be speaking to people like Loki, who's going to be involved in this movement too, and he's speaking to some people he knows in the music industry as well. And we need to get people like Ken Loach and others on board. How can we use culture to try and empower people and spread this message as well? And then the final component is to learn the lessons of street protests, of what the Gilets Jaunes are doing. And so we're launching, or hoping to launch this new movement through a conference later this year in the spring in Derby. And we will have speakers there from the Assange, we hope. We've got Abby Martin has already agreed, although she's pregnant at the moment, so that may...
Is she really?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Baby's due on the 1st of June, so that may impinge on her ability, although she's very keen to be here, irrespective of that. She did, because I said, well, you might have had your baby over here, so there are benefits of dual citizenship. So she and Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton, they are also very keen and want to be there. Bill Mitchell, the Australian economist, modern monetary theory economist, because I do think we need to give people the skill set in relation to how the economy works and so on, and there's a range of other British local speakers as well. So we're going to have a series of workshops and plenary sessions with a view to then kind of discussing this through and then moving it on. But what I'm hoping is ultimately, if this flies, it's easy to say, it's a little bit to pull it off. This is what I'm hoping. But ultimately, what I hope is that a new generation of working class leaders will come through and then take elected positions. Because look, even now, under this Tory government, in local government, local authorities, in spite of all the restrictions that have been imposed upon them, can do many good things to try and push back against the Tory cuts. And there are two things that I would like to see local authorities doing right now. And so by empowering communities, where they can, and giving them the skill set to demand this, but also encouraging people to put themselves forward as new elected community leaders on local authorities. Local authorities could now, under legislation ironically brought in by the Tories, Eric Pickles, who piloted through the House the 2012 Local Government Finance Act, that gives local authorities the ability to introduce differential discounts. That therefore means that local authorities can introduce a big increase in council tax to stop the Tory cuts and actually build in some growth as well on whatever is important at the local level. And the ability to do this will be determined obviously by the number of properties that are in the higher bands, because the way it would work, the way I wish to see it work anyway, and this is something I've put to a number of Labour groups and mayors, but none of them have taken it forward so far, is that you essentially say to the rich people in the borough, we're going to put a big increase on your council because you've got the broadest shoulders, so you can pay for this. It's not an ideal situation. Local government finance needs to be revised. It needs a root and branch reform, but we're not in that situation now. We've had 10 years of austerity cuts. Public services have been decimated. We need to, just to have a decent society in our local borough, we need more resources. You're the people with the resources.
Yeah.
We're going to ask you to pay a lot more. And at the same time, we're going to freeze the council tax for 80 to 85 and 90%, depending on how many there are in the higher bands, as it were, how much you can raise through increasing council tax all those households with the bigger households. That is something that I think could really make a huge difference. You then have to, under the 2011 Localism Act, go to a referendum to get that agreed by the public in that borough. But I think you could win that argument.
Yeah,
it's a way of engaging people in local politics and national politics for that matter. You can say, look, the terrible cuts that the Tories, central government, have imposed on us are requiring us to take this extreme measure. We're asking the rich people to pay more. We don't want you to pay more. We want to freeze your council. Please support us in this endeavour to protect your public services and indeed improve your public services in certain areas. And for anybody who's asset rich but cash poor, you can have a very generous council tax support scheme, so they are protected. So you're not going to actually, as it were, put people in a difficult situation when they end up living, through circumstances beyond their control, living in a big house with little resource to be able to pay a big increase in council tax. But that's one thing I think that could be done. The second thing which I think they could do, without having to go to any referendum or anything, is to embark on a massive council house building programme, because the Tories, again, have lifted the cap on the housing revenue account. So what I would want to see is, through this grassroots movement, bringing people together, sharing best practice, building this infrastructure, raising political consciousness, to demand more from their local authorities initially, and then ultimately to get elected to those local authorities and say, look, we are going to stop these cuts, we're going to improve our public services, we're going to build the council houses that people need. That will actually not just satisfy a social need, it will create lots of jobs in the local borough for people. It will reduce the social security bill as well, because we'll be able to provide a lower cost alternative to the higher, more expensive private rented accommodation that many people are forced into. And those are just two things that could be done right now, could be done right now. Nobody's doing it. And there is a bit of a renaissance in council housing, but nothing on the scale that we need. And so this is the sort of thing I'm hoping that a mobilised, enthused grassroots movement could help to bring about. Because one of the things I've been very passionate about, and what I was saying when I was going around, and indeed still do go around, talking about the Democracy Roadshow, is that we've got to find a way as a Labour movement to do politics with people, not to people. Mm-hmm. For far too long, people, particularly in working class communities, see, the Labour Party comes and knocks on our doors and then goes away.
Relationship.
Yeah. And we've got to be doing politics with people so people feel it's their movement in that sense, And it's not just about listening to people, it's now enabling people to kind of shape the agenda in that sense. So I think there's everything to play for. It's a really, depressing time. I mean, the Metropolitans in the Labour Party have handed Boris Johnson an 80-seat majority now. But we've got to somehow keep hope alive. And I always quote that wonderful line in the Shawshank Redemption when Redding says to Andy Dufresne, because Andy's talking about maintaining hope in that awful, bleak environment of the prison there, and Red Redding says to him, Andy, hope is a very dangerous thing in this place. And Andy Dufresne responds by saying, no, Red, hope is a good thing. Maybe the best thing. Hope is a good thing. Maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. And that's something I think that as socialists we need to hold true, because again, another great quote from Tony Benn once said that there are two flames that burn in the human heart, the flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope that can build a better world, and that's what we should be doing.
I can certainly see that you've got both flames in you, Chris. I am,
try to.
I'm when you get closer to the Labour left the conference, I would be more than happy to come and film it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're not going to get much interest from the mainstream.
I doubt that very much.
I'm not calling them mainstream media anymore, by the way. We're calling them old media.
Yeah, or the big media, whatever. Yeah,
we can't rely on old media to change. We have to be the change.
No, I agree.
We have to be the change that we want in the world. And I'm really, really impressed with you, because you definitely are being the change that you want in the world. And it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Cheers.